Hello, my name is Susan Stone and I am the Credit Union SA Chair of Economics at UniSA. I'm very happy to be here with you today to talk about the South Australian economy. As you'll see from this slide, the South Australian economy has really been doing quite well since COVID. It's managed to outperform in terms of growth Australia as a whole, and this has been shown up in numbers that we see in terms of strong sales growth, in terms of also SA has been ranked #1 number of times in the CommSec reports. And unfortunately, it's also been seen as quite high inflation numbers, which we expect to continue at least until the new year. One of the other reasons the South Australian market has been performing so well is the housing market, which has good and bad sides. If you own a home, it's great. As you can see from these slides, South Australia's values in their housing market have increased substantially in the last 2 years. And as you can see from this one, it actually has increased higher than any other state capital in Adelaide except for Perth. And even regional Australia, South Australia, has outperformed most of the other regional areas in the country. This, as I mentioned before, South Australia has performed quite well in the CommSec reports, which rank each state or territory relative to its 10 years past performance. South Australia has been ranked #1 for 3 of the past 4 quarters and #2 in this most recent quarter. But that is really showing how strong the South Australian economy has been. We see here that it's been the #1 in the past month in terms of annual growth. You can also see that the housing financing has done very well, not too high, showing that there's not just price increases but volume increases and other things like equipment investment, which have also outperformed most of the other states and territories. The next slide, as you can see, are looking at some of the RBA projections. Now, these are important because it's telling us what the RBA thinks is going to happen, which has a big influence on when they're going to lower interest rates. So the 2 big ones I want to point out here is the fact that business investment, they expect business investment to start to come back at the beginning of 2025. So once business investment comes back, that means that the economy will start to have its own momentum, hopefully non-inflationary momentum, and we see that dwelling investment is really supposed to start to really kick in at the end of the year. So next year, dwelling investment will still be a bit weak, but going forward after that, we expect to see a big increase. Value added per sector is very important because it tells us where the South Australian economy has most of its economic growth. And in this slide, it compares South Australia with the rest of Australia, so you can see where our relative strengths lie. Big one is the health and professional cares. That means we're very big in terms of health services. And another one that I wanted to point out, education and training. This is a very important sector for South Australia. As you can see here, relative to Australia as a whole, it contributes more to the economy than most other sectors. And we also see that it's very important in terms of South Australia exports. We can see that services exports as a whole have kind of gone up and down with COVID, but since COVID, South Australian exports really have, of education, have increased, and they've increased much faster than those services exports as a whole. Where we can see population and employment growth expected in the future, obviously in healthcare, as the South Australian population ages, that's going to require a lot more workers in the healthcare sector, but also education. Education and training is another area that's going to be important in terms of economic growth and where we see a lot of employment in the future. And this shows you the difference in terms of growth in the last about 5-6 years between South Australia and Australia as a whole. The dark green bars show how the sectors in which employment have grown the most. And once again, we see that construction is a big sector, but also education and training. And that's important because Australia, when we look at other countries around the world, actually spends less on business training. And this is important because South Australian businesses really do need to invest in training and education of their workers. If we're going to grow, we need to grow through innovation, we need to grow through business development, and that requires businesses to train. And if they don't do it internally, they're going to require those services from different institutions, whether it be TAFE, whether it be working more with high schools throughout the community so that they can prepare students to meet the challenges going forward and ensure they have all of the skills that they need. But the important point is, if South Australia really wants to grow and thrive, what we really do need is to have greater investment in training, especially in the business community. And the reason you can see on this slide, there's this thing that the Premier likes to talk about, economic complexity. And basically, economic complexity means that we don't have all our eggs in one basket, that we're not relying just on mining or just on agriculture, that we have a very strong range of companies that can grow and innovate and basically offer employment opportunities, especially to our youth. And we can see that over the years, Australia as a whole, South Australia among them, has a declining sense of complexity, meaning there's not that diversity that we really need. The only state or territory that has seen an increase recently is Queensland, and we've actually experienced that by having a number of high-end businesses, very high-profile businesses, actually move to Queensland. So South Australia really does need to have this movement to help businesses grow. And as I said earlier, the education training sector is an important part of that. So going forward, we know that the South Australian government is making a lot of land available so that we can house people, because if we're going to grow as a state, we need to put people places. We need to ensure that migrants, that the older population, that young families have a place to live. That's number one. But we also need to ensure that the infrastructures around it, school, hospitals, roads, and the necessary underlying infrastructure such as water and sewage. We also know that there's going to be this growth because of AUKUS. There's going to be an increasing need in both skilled workers, but as I said before, we're going to need different types of businesses to support that, because they're going to need suppliers and they're going to need other types of services to feed into that program. And that's going to require new type of thinking, innovation, and business growth and development. And finally, as I mentioned before, the changing demographics here in South Australia. South Australia, as Australia as a whole, is getting older. And that older population is going to require more healthcare services. We see that in the projections of needing healthcare workers. But we're also seeing it in terms of it's going to have fiscal implications for the South Australian government. So putting all of that together, South Australia has what it needs in place, especially in the education and training sector. Hopefully it'll be growing in the housing sector to really meet the challenges going forward. I thank you for your attention.